Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Kendra Kapelke, and I'm one of the editors of Passenger. Passenger is an independent press that focuses on writers over 50. We publish a journal, books, produce a podcast, and generally exist to nurture and make public the extraordinary talents of older writers, as well as provide a community where art is shared. We are deeply grateful to the Morgenthau family for creating the prestigious Henry Morgenthau First Book Poetry Prize for a writer 70 and older in memory of their father, Henry Morgenthau III. Henry Morgenthau decided in his 90s that he wanted to become a poet. He thought poetry was the best way to discover who he was, to wrestle with complicated feelings. He signed up for a writing class and had the good fortune to study with David Keplinger. When Henry was 99, Passenger published his book, his first book of poems, A Sunday in Purgatory. If you're interested in finding out more about Henry or the prize, please go to our website. Today's events is in two parts. First, we'll hear from poet Mark Elber, reading from his award-winning book, Headstone. Following that, Mark will be joined for a conversation with David Keplinger, who selected Mark's book for the 2022 Morgenthau Prize. And now to introduce our poet, Mark Elber. Thank you, Christine, and thank you to John Shore for that video, beautiful video. Let me try and paint a picture of the writer behind the book. Mark Elber was born and raised in Queens to Holocaust survivors. He grew up hearing Polish, Yiddish, Russian, German, and English spoken in his home. His father spoke 7 languages and his mother spoke 6. He said his earliest writing was fueled by his love of language and its sounds. Rather than following the family path into the medical profession, Mark pursued philosophy, Jewish mysticism, poetry, and music. He studied Kabbalah at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, received an MFA from Warren Wilson College, and is an ordained rabbi. Currently, Mark serves as rabbi at Temple Beth El in Fall River, Massachusetts. Mark said this: "I have a deep inner need to write. There have been many times when I have felt so overwhelmed by the beauty and majesty of life that I have ached to articulate those feelings. At other times, I have felt such pain or outrage at people's suffering that I have felt compelled to try to express that. I'm delighted to present to you Mark Elber.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm also deeply grateful to the Morgenthau family for this opportunity. This book has a lot to do with identity, and an important part of that identity has to do with my parents, of course, and my grandparents, whom I never met, either my father's nor my mother's. So I'm going to try to give a few explanatory notes about any poem that might have something that's not obvious to people, to the listeners. So my father was from a town called Stanislavov, which was Poland between the two wars. Now it's Ukraine, and it's not called Stanislavov either. Now it's called Ivano-Frankivsk. My father's parents were killed in 1941, in October 1941, in a mass killing. So that's referred to in the poem. The Babi Yar is the most infamous of those events, but there were many others in other towns in Poland and Ukraine. Requiem. My father went to sleep in his skin in the sun-flushed morning, in the flat-lined morning that shoveled a pit into my 35th year, spadeful by spadeful, and the sky collapsed over Queens. If I could, I'd revive the sound of his voice, barely caught on a few bargain cassettes, the accent of his generation driven from the villages of their birth, the bellowing lung sacs of roosters squawking through the pebbled alleys, the straw beds, the well-stubbled streets of mud and stone. If I could replay the red hair of my youth when Atlas stood 5'6" in a stethoscope before we swallowed our love songs to each other, I'd exhume his spoken word lullabies, the chain of Slavic syllables that links me to his father's dark forests, to the kinks in his beard, to the warm lips buried in a riddled clearing, 10,000 corpses deep. I think I forgot to mention that my father was a doctor, which was what the stethoscope reference was from. My parents met because my father was was a doctor in the Russian army. My mother, and he was drafted, and my mother was a nurse, also in the Russian army, and that's how they met. I was born in the Boulevard Hospital in Astoria, Queens, but I grew up in Sunnyside on the other side of the tracks. There's a reference to the chanting of Jacob in this poem, which comes from the weekly Torah portion. Every Saturday morning, there's another portion of the 5 books of Moses that's read. And on the day that I was born, that Saturday, that day was, they were reading about Jacob, the patriarch. And our home in Sunnyside was a few miles from LaGuardia Airport. Saturday. I was born on a Saturday, 10:47 a.m., an inch of snow coating Astoria, Queens, a mid-December day of sirens and corks jetting from dark chilled bottles, a day of bus exhaust, belching blue-gray into the frigid air, assembly lines greasing the cogs of America's wheels, stitching gloves for the coming frost, trees in their barren beauty, the browns of bark climbing out of the planted sidewalks, bountiful brick. The gardens of Sunnyside were mostly soil, dark, gritty, rocky, and shrubbed, a dented hubcap or two, seeds in their deep sleep. In every borough, there was singing in synagogues that morning, parchment unscrolled on felt-covered tables, chanting of Jacob's return to the wilderness of his youth, camels on the horizon bearing clay jugs, smooth to the touch, humps festooned with fig cakes, shawls draped on the soft hair of their backs. I was wrested out of the womb, dumped wailing into the Western world, into a century wounded by wars, lying on the belly of all that maternity, the web of veins, the life heaving in our chests, idling at a high pitch, in the 1951 of high fidelity, of housewives herded into suburbs, the hit parade of love and marriage, the promise of stainless steel, tarnished from the vantage of my sparse coat of snowy hair, the brittle reward for those who wait, the whir of propellers in the distant background, the hum of the decades to come. There's one reference to refusing reparations. After the war, for Holocaust survivors, the German government offered reparations, and my father refused to take them. My father's hands held the blue globe, displaying the distance between our births, the slow trek of continents, the vast, wet, and dizzying spin. My mother singing to herself at the sink. His hands gripped the steering wheel, white walls and wide turns, the fat-assed fins of late 50s Detroit, the AM channels chatter, songs squeezed between commercials, his foil-lined ashtray buried in the mentholated butts of Cools, subways rattling overhead, a collision of cultures between the front seat and back, the schoolyard banter native to New York, and an accent importing a world half an atlas away. Refusing reparations for his snuffed out generations, my father's hands split the unruly Atlantic, gently stroked my cheek. Further notes from the underground, a few references. The subway that's now called the 7, the Flushing line was the IRT back in those days. And it's an elevated subway near about a block and a half from where I lived. It just so happened that the local stop right near me was Bliss Street. A happy accident. And I referred to Oscar Williams, who in 12th grade in high school, we had an anthology of 20 major American poets. So I read that anthology. And Willets Point is where the World's Fair was. I think that's it for the non-New Yorkers. And we were going to the Museum of Natural History. That's when I referred to the dinosaurs. Further notes from the underground. I first rode the subway on my father's lap on the broad seats of upholstered straw. The world was bigger then, streets steeper. I scrambled up the steps of the sky-high station, walked under the turnstile, and made the long journey to the dinosaur bones in the universe of skyscrapers. I first rode the subway on my father's lap, on his gabardine coat in the clattering car, beside my humming mother, my New World brother, the ghosts of trolley cars sparking below. My small hands gripped his dark sleeve as we tunneled under the East River through the eardrum pressure, the car crammed with blank stares and cardboard ads for Luckies and Camels and slim women laughing against a backdrop of 80 proof. The years chugged by and the stars grew fainter in the Queen's night. Hair cropped up in surprising places. I was 12:30 on the elevated platform when the Flushing local barreled into Bliss Street, jerked open its doors, and lured me away from the oaths that echoed off the crushed stone underbelly of the L, from the nominal hedges and dog-drizzled hydrants, the parochial fists of my peers. The conductor's yawp, leaving Sunnyside behind in a blur of dark brick and TV antennas blindly stabbing at the sky. I first met Walt Whitman in the robin's egg blue cars suspended in view of my draft board between the winter Tet offensive and the spring assassination, between the uniforms of Wall Street and the jeans of my generation. Oscar Williams made the introduction, as I held the cold silver pole in my other hand. Above the huddled houses massed in view of the city's spires, side streets stuffed with our father's wheels locked in park. The subway shuttled me to the World's Fair, to the gutted globe suspended in a fountain, a few years before Jimmy's star-spangled banner fluttered in the shredding sky and regulation boots mired in the marshes of East Asia. I walked down the long ramps from Willets Point, the crowd congealing below, staking my claim on the sinuous lines awaiting a glimpse of the future from GM, GE, and Ford. And all these years later, I'm still waiting. From the dawn of my first stubble, from the taut reins in my parents' grip, from my muzzled declarations of independence, the IRT whisked me from the landscape of crumpled Budweisers, from the regnant polyester, from the crucified lord of my neighbors looking down at me every few blocks. So I stood on the local platform, eyeing the expresses bolting by, emerging in the bearded Brooklyn of ecstatic prayer, the agnostic alleyways of the West Village. I'm going to read the first part one of the it's a five-part poem, the title poem, Headstone. The cemetery is in Queens. It's called Mount Hebron, and there was a plot for 4 people because my family was my parents and my brother and I. Headstone. 5 stones perch on the family headstone. 5 stones, each the size of a child's fist. The Latin letters etched in the polished gray are large enough for the 4 of us. But no stone marks your parents' graves. No stone separates the thousands buried with them that day in a Polish meadow. On the family gravesite, the grass is trimmed like your father's beard that never had the chance to gray. On the family gravesite, it is autumn, and a squirrel stands on its hind legs, devouring an acorn. A grandchild teethes in Boston. A grandchild closes the books your father lived by. He can no longer recall the alphabet, which comes from another continent, nor pronounce your father's name if he ever knew it. And there are no pictures in Boston of your parents. There are no pictures in Poland of your parents. There is no sign in the Polish forests of your father's labors there. The trees that are gone are gone. Those that remain are 50 rings thicker. Flat stones skip through the placid waves on the Long Island Harbor beach. Pebbles cushion the tanned feet summer after summer, as I am busy writing love letters to the dead, as I am busy watching the pebbles become sand, letting the sand sift in 10,000 grains through my fingers. A hard rain pelts the harbor. 5 stones are dislodged from the rough crown of the headstone in the Queens Cemetery, overlooking the site of the World's Fair, where crowds gathered in 1939 with swirls of confection, and the future was yesterday. 1939, and the mass graves are almost ready. 1939, and the sky is falling over Poland. It is autumn, and you are walking through the chilling nights and the matted forests, heading into the black sunrise, fleeing the Nazi West for the Soviet East. You are 31 and not yet my father. You have too many deaths to experience first. When you still were born in 1908 and hadn't yet patched over the last 2 numbers to erase certain years, when you stood in the white-robed clinics, short-haired and hopeful, and the war was no more than a threatening voice over the histrionic airwaves, but the West would protect us, and you hadn't yet met my mother, and your hands were so soft around a scalpel. You had a cousin in America who took your father's passage, for this was a land of gangsters, and your father wanted none of it. One generation passes down silent to the next. One generation seeks refuge in silence from the next. One generation suffers in silence from the next. Okay. I have a few notes for this. Okay, this is called Family Secrets. So on September 1st, 1939, when the war began, my father was doing his residency. He was a brain surgeon. He was doing his residency in Krakow, in Poland, which was in the western part of Poland. And so he walked at night for a couple of weeks with other people to the eastern part of Poland, so which was the part that Russia controlled at that point. And as I said earlier, that's how my father was drafted into the Russian army as a doctor, and my mother, as a nurse, volunteered. My mother came from an ultra-Orthodox, a Hasidic home, actually, and my father from an Orthodox home. Okay, the two more things. I used the word addicts referring to the upstairs, ATTICS, not addicts, like people who are addicted. And there's one more phrase. A swastika in German is called Hakenkreuz, which means a crooked cross. Family secrets. When the dawn bombs blitzed Poland, gutting buildings, blasting the past off course, my parents, destined to never cross paths, 62 miles and a deity apart, suddenly veered towards each other. When black mustaches severed Poland between them and the white lab coats of the Reich were steeped in poison gas, when paranoia was proof of sanity, my father stored a stiletto in his calf-length boots, walking the night forests of forged identities and stolen Lugers from Krakow to the Russian East. Before the ghettos were wrapped in barbed wire and the crooked cross plunged its crippling stake wherever it could, he kept walking under moonlight, surviving on roots. Watching other Jews herded in a town square, he weighed the risks of capture and compliance and continued. With Berlin breathing down his neck, he reached his home, finding himself drafted into a Soviet uniform, kissing his parents goodbye, scraping the whiskers from his face, leaving his copper hair open to the sky, leaving the terrified addicts and their tremble, to ride the military trains, suture the skulls of soldiers at Stalingrad, where the woman who would hemorrhage me into the new world and name me in memory of his parents handed him his scalpels. My mother's song. My mother loved to sing. Should tell you that. She had a beautiful voice. She was always singing, walking around the house. My mother's song. My mother sang to console herself, to keep the years of bare cupboards at bay, shield herself from memories of typhus and typhoid, from the sweats and shivers of soldiers she nursed into the next world. She sang to the young woman she once was, bereaved, bewildered, bombarded on a train from Stalingrad. Her voice carried cries that straddled an ocean, prayers stomped at the pit of the throat that even a deaf God might hear. My mother sang at the sink, remembering tastes long turned to ash with pre-war Poland, the sting of horseradish smothering the sweet fish, the cabbage leaves coddling the spiced ground beef, rice, and raisins, the oral lore kneaded into braided breads, the drizzle of honey. Her voice muffled the shrieks of children who didn't outlive November 1941, buried under the bulk of their parents. My mother would one day laugh again with abandon, but for the broken glass always in the background. Hum in loud dresses, gathering friends in the dining room under the chandelier, singing the multi-tongued melodies of the exiled. And the last poem I'll read is about our son, Lev, who just turned 20 this past week, but this is about when he was a little boy. Your small hands. You began as a kiss in an English garden. The nurse held you up, 5 ruddy pounds of instinct, and your one-syllable song, the father of all you will ever utter. You who gravitate towards the magnet of any open door, dwarfing my dreams as you run room to room, laughing over your shoulder, hoping to be chaste. Your small lips coronate the breast. Your torso is an open embrace. Your hands lift your last Cheerios to my lips. A mirror is a baby babbling back at you. A piano, a singing oasis of wood and ivory. Every puddle a beach. You are a magician with nothing up your sleeve but the softest skin. Thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, Mark. I just have to say that this book is filled with millions of words, and I am utterly speechless by it when I listen to it, which is, I guess, what poetry is for. Thank you so much for a remarkable reading.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful. I think Henry Morgenthau, wherever he is, would be so taken with your work. So thank you very much. We are now moving into part 2 of our event, our reading, and I'd like to bring in David Keplinger, who served as the judge for the Morgenthau Poetry Contest and selected Mark's manuscript headstone. David Keplinger is the author of 8 collections of poetry, most recently The World to Come from Conduit Books in 2021. He's the recipient of many literary prizes, including the UNT Rilke Prize for his book, Another World. David is on the faculty at American University in Washington, D.C., where this past year he won the Distinguished Teaching and Scholarship Award. Congratulations. Passager has been so honored to have David here as part of our family. Like Henry Morgenthau, his presence continues to inspire and enrich us. We're delighted to have you with us today, David. And now I will go off and let the two of you have a conversation.
Thank you, Kendra. Can you all hear me? Great. Oh, Mark, that was absolutely lovely. And in fact, while you were reading, I saw that Ben Morgenthau, Henry's son, was one of the folks who commented in the chat. And what I could read as it came up was that your work is such a treasure, and he couldn't be more right about that. That there is something very valuable and very precious about what you have to communicate in your poetry. And I think some poets are wonderful at turning a phrase, and some poets have a musical quality, and other poets have wisdom. But what I noted when I came across your book was that this poet seems to have it all. And I want to talk to you about how that happened. I want to talk a little bit about your journey as a poet, and then I thought that I would open it up to some of your friends and family and the people who have gathered here to ask some questions as well. So Kendra, am I right that we have until 3 o'clock? Is that correct? Okay. So in the back of the book, Mark, you reference a wonderful story about Naropa University. And it's funny because as soon as I opened your book, I thought to myself, oh, Allen Ginsberg, a supermarket in California. And then in the back of the book now, I see that there's a connection with Allen Ginsberg and Naropa. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. First of all, thank you for those incredibly kind words. So I went to study with Ginsberg, to apprentice with him in the summer of 1981. And, I drove out to Colorado. But actually, there's a little pre-story to that. One of the things that first really got me into poetry, so after the anthology that I mentioned earlier, was that we had to take in freshman year in the spring, we had to take a poetry class, and the teacher did not have a textbook yet, and he gave us a Xeroxed version of the very poem that you mentioned, a supermarket in California. And I loved the poem. I knew of who Ginsberg was as a cultural figure, but I didn't know his poetry at all. And so I went to the bookstore and I started buying his books and reading them, and I fell in love with this poet. So then in 1981, when I went to Naropa, which was an incredible experience, and because I had a car, I was able to drive him around quite a bit. And the first place we went was to a supermarket shopping. So that was, you had to pinch yourself. Is this really happening?
And so you were at Naropa in 1981, you said? So that
Yeah, the summer of 81, 10 weeks.
That was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And you were writing poetry at that time. And so over the years, has poetry come in and out of your life, or has it been a constant presence?
It's been a constant presence to which I've paid more or less attention over the years. In other words, devoted more or less time. Because I wrote songs for about 20 years also.
You were in a rock band.
Yeah, I put a couple of bands together in the first half of the 80s.
And what kind of music, can I ask you?
You can. I called it at the time literate rock and roll because I was trying, I paid a lot of attention to the lyrics.
I have a question back to the book, the content of the book, the headstone masterpiece at the center. I mean, really, it is an incredible achievement.
Thank you so much.
Saying that it's a memoir, and it's a long poem, and it's a lyric. It's all the things that I mean, contemporary American poetry is achieving in different forms, but this poem seems to capture it all. So you have this headstone poem at the center, and then later in the book, you talk about the ways that you and the father locked horns a little bit. I'm wondering, did you think about how to order those revelations, whether to put the loving poem first and then the complicated poem second, or was that always the way that the book unfolded for you?
Well, I sought out advice also on how to structure the book, because I was playing with the various ways of organizing it, but I sought outside help to help me create. So what happens in the book, I think there is a kind of a narrative arc so it begins kind of with my father and my grandfather, and then ends with Lev's birth, our son's birth. So there's a few generations that are kind of evolving through the context of the manuscript.
Yeah, I thought that was a sharp move, and it also established the sense of history behind it all. So it did seem important that came first. But you do give a full-throated feeling of emotions around the family, not only the connection to them, but also that moment in your life where there was a break from them, and you captured that as well at the end of the book. I wonder if we could, before I look at the chat and look at some of the questions that are being written there. I wonder if I could ask you about one particular poem,
Sure.
and it's on page 55, I think.
The Belzer Rebbe comes to Stri.
This was one of my favorite poems in the book, and I think it has to do with the emotion that you're capturing at the end. Would you mind reading it?
The poem, the entire poem?
Read the poem?
Sure,
And
I'd love to.
I don't think it would take that long, but I have a question about the end, and it would be great for everybody to hear it.
Okay, so let me just say one quick thing about it. So the title is The Belzer Rebbe Comes to Stri. As I mentioned, Stri was the town that my mother was from, which was 100 kilometers from Stanislavov. And as I think I had mentioned, yes, I had, that my mother came from a Hasidic family, an ultra-Orthodox family. But it wasn't, Belz was another Hasidic group. And of her 4 brothers, her second oldest brother became a follower of the Belzer Rebbe. But my mother used to tell me this story about when that Rebbe, Rebbe is like a guru, like, the spiritual leader of an entire group, when of the time when he came to Stri. So I think that should be enough for people to get the background of it. So the Belzer Rebbe comes to Stri, and no one knew the war would come, that the dancers' beards would be torn from their faces in the same public squares where they danced, with their white shirts leaping out of their pants, with their black hats falling over their eyes, with their feet forgetting every ache in the wonder of being alive. Fear was familiar, like staying home locked and shuttered on Christmas. But this day, the streets belonged to the throngs greeting the Belzer Rebbe in his wide-brimmed hat and long black coat, his pockets full of pleas, shoes for the children, wool for a sweater, oil for the lamp to read by at night. And the children came on their fathers' shoulders where heaven is within reach. And fathers danced with those small bodies aloft like sacred scrolls under the cirrus sky. Everywhere the Rebbe turned, he saw flowers twisting towards the sun, though the earth is dusty and well-trodden, though weeds spread unwatered. The Rebbe saw all that made the feet heavy of the dancers encircling him, and this made his feet heavy too. He heard the sobs swallowed up in the joyous melodies of the high-pitched voices, and he gulped deeply. His stomach growled with their hunger, his mouth parched, his eyes welled up, and he danced with abandon in the closed-off square, for they needed him to. And he sang through the breaks in his voice. And though God is so well hidden in the acts of the stranger, in the drunken gangs of crosstown Saturday nights, in the hunger heard in the beggar's cry, in the mortal fevers of children, the Rebbe must dance to hasten the day when every street will draw a song from our feet, when everyone will be their own Rebbe, and the thousands of footprints made one vast mosaic effaced in the wide-broomed morning. And years later, that day was transported in slivers to other Polish villages, Sobibor, Treblinka, Auschwitz. 9/10 of the memory vanished there, but the Rebbe was smuggled beardless to Palestine over his protests, for his wish was to share his followers' fate, the one thing they couldn't suffer. And the Rebbe's beard slowly grew back under the blue skies and narrow alleys of Jerusalem, but his feet never danced again.
It's so powerful. The moment at the end where the Rebbe is smuggled to Palestine and survives, and you evoke this feeling at the end of the survivor guilt. And I feel like this book is, like Kendra said, is so filled with words and it leaves one speechless. It's so filled with the known. What can I know? What can I remember? What can I remember? But there's also some element of what can never be known and what can never be remembered that it's circling around. that at the center of this book, there's this void of those who were forgotten.
Hmm.
And likewise too, at the center of the book, there is this feeling of, oh, we survived and they didn't. And I wonder, did that affect your writing process? Were you thinking about survivor guilt, which often happens with the children of Holocaust survivors?
I would not say thinking about it consciously, but experiencing it unconsciously a lot. I hope I can express this without feeling overwhelmed. But I think there was always this very strong feeling of my parents having suffered and not wanting them to suffer more. You know, by disappointing them, et cetera, et cetera. And yet at the same time, feeling the need to be myself. So that was a constant internal conflict.
Yeah. Lovely, Mark. It's a beautiful poem.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to look through the chat here. And I don't see any questions. I see a lot of praise from over 100 participants in this meeting. If anyone has a question, please ask it now. Here we are. This is from Hal Grinberg. Could Mark describe how forthcoming his parents were about their past and their experiences? Did they talk willingly about the details?
No, they didn't. They didn't talk about it very willingly, but my mother was much more forthcoming about it than my father. So, so I learned a lot about my father's past from my mother. He was much more stoic and, you know, and quiet, although he had an enormous amount of emotion too, but it was more like, you know, bottled up inside, and then it might spring open every once in a while. But my mother, her emotions were on the surface all the time. And so the presence of, particularly of my mother's parents and her four brothers, was always a presence there in our family. So I was very aware of the Holocaust. We didn't call it that at the time. We just called it the war. From the time my earliest memories, from the age of 4 already, I was very aware of it. And also all of my parents' social life was around other Polish Jewish refugees from World War II. Most of them doctors also. So that was their little chevra, you know, their little group of friends. Wasn't that little, you know, their group of friends. So that absence, you know, of the earlier generation, the grandparents' generation, I hardly knew anybody my age who had grandparents.
Mm.
Very, very rare for somebody to have a grandparent.
And as you're speaking, I want to ask you, your brother was born in Europe.
Actually, in Asia, in Bukhara. But my parents didn't tell that to us.
Oh, you didn't know that?
No, only I found out when I was about 20. And they hadn't even told him.
I was going to ask if that was an added feeling of separation for you, because you were the one that was born in the United States.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I was about 20. I thought that they told me that my brother was born in Pittsburgh, a place they had never been to.
Which is also a wonderful poem, another favorite of mine.
Thank you.
You studied at Warren Wilson?
Yes.
You received an MFA from Warren Wilson College?
Yes, yes.
And you studied with greats like Ellen Bryant Boyd. Was Ed Hirsch a teacher there, or did you study with him elsewhere?
I studied with him at Breadlove in 2005.
What role did these teachers play in your development? I guess this is all post 1981, or even
this is 2015 to 2017.
Wow.
Much more recently.
What role did they play in your development? I mean, at that point, you already had developed a voice that was pretty firm and confident.
I think it was an incredible experience to study at Warren Wilson. I really loved it. Actually, I worked with 4 particular poets there, with Brooks Haxton, with Daisy Freed, Alan Williamson, and Alan Shapiro, and each one of them was a fabulous teacher. I think that they would try to encourage your strengths and encourage you to overcome your weaknesses, your shortcomings. So I think that it was invaluable.
That is an approach that I take as well. And we have a question here from Shirley Brewer. Could you describe your writing process? How long did it take you to write the poem Headstone? And by the way, I met you at the wedding of my poet friends, Ona Gitz and Dan Simpson.
Ona Gritz. Wow, and Dan Simpson. Oh, that's great.
So
It took a long time. Well, the poem Headstone itself, I started it in, I was on a residency at the Malay Colony for the Arts. And I started the last, it was a month-long residency, and I started the last week. But there was no way I was going to polish it, but I knew that if I didn't get the entire structure of it down before I left, it would be hard for me to find that kind of leisure to be able to work on it. So I stayed up all night, my last night there, to just get the final structure of it, and then spent the next half year, kind of working on it and polishing it. And then I was in this is a long time ago, from October 1992 to April 1993 in an artist colony in Israel called the Arad Arts Colony, and the Arad Arts Program. And during that time is when I polished that poem. So the manuscript actually started over 30 years ago, but it's been evolving ever since.
And did the poem come out as we see it? Did it come out with the 5 stones on the headstone at the first draft?
It might have started that way. It might have started with that line. That's possible. But I'm always constantly going over poems and usually reading them out loud to myself. I'm usually the composition, because the person asked about composition. I'm usually reading it out loud to work with the sound and the rhythm. And I just keep reading it, hoping for another line to pop up.
And they do.
Sometimes.
You studied Kabbalah at Hebrew U?
Yes, that's true. Right.
Well, and we have a question here. How do you feel your rabbinic activities and poetry writing intersect? I guess I could add my question about Kabbalah. Does that intersect at all to what happens when you write a poem?
Well, I hope that a lot of the poems come from a kind of spiritual place, a certain sense of reverence for life, a certain sense of a hope to connect with that which is transcendent. So the study of Kabbalah for me became at first, for the 4 years of graduate school, it was an academic discipline. In other words, I wanted to be a professor, but at a certain point, moving to the West Village in Manhattan, I realized that academia was not really for me, but I hoped that it would remain a source of inspiration, so I think in a certain way, the rabbinic work and the poetry kind of travel down parallel paths and hopefully feed each other somewhat. I don't bring that much poetry into the temple, though. A little bit.
Have you done any teaching of poetry writing or literature?
No, I would love to actually, but I haven't.
A question that I'm seeing here from Elaine Person. How long did it take to write the book? And it sounds like you answered that question.
Yeah, 30 years.
Did you have a draft of it when you had arrived at Warren Wilson, or was it?
Well, it was constantly evolving. The first incarnation of it was in 1993. During the Arad Arts, at the end of the Arad Arts project, I felt I had enough stuff. But then over the years, I as new poems were coming up, if I thought that they were better than poems that were already in the manuscript,
Yes.
I would change them. I would substitute them.
And how do you feel now, Mark? I mean, how did it feel when you got the word that you'd won this prize and 30 years of work came to fruition?
Incredulous and ecstatic. Truly, and incredibly grateful. Incredibly grateful.
And deeply deserved. It is a beautiful work. Are you going to work on another book? Do you
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I saw one quickly in the Q&A. Someone asked about what my parents thought of my writing poetry, which is a very good question. My father respected literature, but he thought that I should become a doctor, and he kept trying to convince me to do that. And so they thought it's a nice hobby. That's what they really thought. It's a nice hobby.
Did he see becoming a doctor as a respectable choice or a safe choice?
For him, it was a calling. He thought it was the greatest thing you could possibly do, to heal other people. What more could you possibly want to do? And plus to be fairly independent, not dependent on other people for your livelihood. So he just thought, if you have this up, if you could possibly do this, why wouldn't you want to? Plus for him, I should say, he he had to study, he had to go to France to study medicine. He could not, as a Jew in Poland, it was virtually impossible to go to medical school. And he didn't really know French, but he was very gifted with languages. So he went to France, he was accepted there, and he actually graduated number 2 in his class. So he did a lot, sacrificed a great deal to become a doctor. So if, I didn't have the hardships that he had, because he was a doctor. So how, to him, well, how could I possibly not want to pursue this incredible calling?
And I have one more question about your father, Mark. He died in 1987.
Yes.
Were you writing about him before that, or did a lot of this writing usher out as a result of your mourning and trying to find words to pass through the grief?
I had written one long poem about him a year, and actually 2 long poems about him before he died. But then it took me probably 5 years at least to even begin to start writing about him after his death. In other words, I felt it was there, but it was just gestating for all those years.
I'm sure all the poets in the gallery know exactly what you're talking about. That feeling that the poem is there and it'll pop up when it's ready, and it certainly did. This is an enormous achievement, and I was really proud to be a part of the process of bringing it into publication. But your work is really profoundly moving to me. So
thank you so much. I mean, I'm really so grateful. Really, thank you so much.
Mark, I hope that you can see the chat and all of the feedback that you're getting from the listeners. There's a lot to say here.
Yeah. This, am I on? I'm on, right?
Yes, you're on.
Yeah, I think the chat really functions as a kind of postlude to our event, because I know that Mark will get a lot of enjoyment out of reading your comments. So if you haven't made a comment yet, and if there's something that you want to say, one little thing, just put it on the chat, please. Whatever you're feeling right now really captures part of this experience we're having, is what we're all feeling from these remarkable poems. So I really can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough, Mark, for this remarkable. Oh my God, Mark, is that how you got your name? Anyway, for this remarkable reading. And David, thank you so much from everything you've given to Passenger, including selecting this beautiful book and engaging in this conversation with Mark. That was a real treat for us to listen. Thank you.
And thank you also to the people who attended. Thank you so much. It really means a lot.
I wish we could actually see you, but we can see your words, and that counts for a lot. Let me remind all of you that you can buy this book. That's why we're publishers, so that you can buy it, and you can buy it on our website. Christine Drahl has posted the link on the chat. It's easy to purchase. If you can think of anybody in your world that you think would enjoy reading Headstone, we really hope that you will purchase it. The experience of reading it from beginning to end has always been, for me, kind of exalted because of the building between the poems, and before you know it, all the generations are here, and you just really you're really in a different place. So I encourage you all to read it. And I also want to just add that if you'd like to give a gift to the Morgenthau Fund, and really hope, this was our dream, to have a prize that acknowledged an older writer for his first book. I don't think there's a prize like this in the country still, 70 and older, to really give this chapter of our life all of the beauty and passion and wisdom that I think Mark exemplifies, and is what Passenger is about. So if you agree with us and you'd like to help us and join our world, we would so appreciate it. Christine will put a slide up about that, I think. And one more thing is, I wanted to bring the Passenger people into the room.
Hi. Well, as many times as I've read these poems, they came in a new way. I mean, so rich. It was a beautiful, beautiful performance, or performance isn't even the word, but it was a gift. And it was great to have you here too. David, your questions showed such deep appreciation. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else? Roseanne, you want to say hi? No?
Yes, I do want to say hi, and I'm trying to manage the emotion.
Yeah, right. That's it.
It was gorgeous.
Mm.
Thank you very much.
Roseanne is the assistant editor of Passenger, and she is on the other end of the email. So when you write an email to Passenger, it goes right to Roseanne, and she will write you right back. She is amazing. So there she is.
Yep.
And then there's John Shore. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm John Shore. I produce Passenger's weekly podcast, Burning Bright, and I've read several of Mark's poems on various podcasts over the past several months. And I just have to say that hearing Mark read them is a totally different experience. So thank you for not only bringing your words to the page, but the emotion, the quiet emotion behind those words through your voice.
Thank you.
And Christine, do you want to be the last?
Oh gosh, that's a lot. Hi, I'm Christine Drahl, managing editor. Wear a lot of different hats, and so get to do a lot of fun things at Passenger. But I guess if I'm going to say anything, it's just to point out again, Mark, this chat is just flooded with like so much love for you and your poems. And as someone who's, gotten to know you and your work, I can only just reiterate, like, the experience of reading this book was kind of life-changing, really. I don't say that lightly. So I think it's clear that everyone here is also just sort of feeling that transformation. So
Wow.
yeah.
Feel a little overwhelmed by hearing that, but
Mm. Well, that's the experience of reading your book, but it's a good one. So
thank you all for the opportunity and the incredible support. You've been amazing.
Oh. We wish you well on your journey. We'll see you at the KGB bar in New York City in March.
Oh, great.
By hell or high water, we're getting there. And we hope everyone else will join us too. Congratulations again, and we'll
Okay.
thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.